rats. We're rats. We're the rats. We pray at night. We stalk at night. We're the rats. I'm the giant rat that makes all of the rules. Let's see what kind of trouble we can get ourselves into.
This video is about rats, but not that kind of rat. No, we're talking about rationalists. If you don't know what rationalists are, you've come to the right place because I don't either. Describing who and what a rationalist is like trying to lasso Jello. I am far from the first journalist, hell, far from the first YouTuber to attempt this topic. People are curious about the rationalist community now. At this point, I would probably be trying to make a video about rationalists no matter what, trying and failing to really understand the subculture. They're on to me. If it hadn't been a corner of the internet that found me many years ago, and one that I've more recently come to see as where my people are. So you'll understand that I have some emotional biases to disclose. This is something that's important to me that might change your views about me, and that's okay. I will offend people inside and outside the community with this video. I'm not trying to, but I will. I'm trying to make this video like an informative, kind of snarky, but ultimately positive intro to the rationalist community for someone who's never heard of them, and I mean, we'll see how well I do. I'm your host, Tor Parsons. These are my co-hosts, Jolibee the Durian, and taking pride of place for this particular episode, Sluds the Shoggoth, and welcome to a rather different episode of Tor's Cabinet of Curiosities. What is the rationalist community? It's an online subculture, the same as how goths or furries are a subculture. Like any subculture, it has its own lingo, its own internal celebrities, infighting, drama, in-person meetups and online forums, people who left their parents and found their home among the subculture, people raising their kids in the subculture, art and literature made by the community for the community, and, in its most extreme cases, cults. Yes, there are multiple separate cases of cults emerging from Rat World, and unfortunately that's the main thing the public knows about us. But I don't think people realize how not unusual that is for an extremely online community. Practically every week, Strange Eons or Izzy3Zeds puts out a fantastic new episode about a cult that started on Tumblr or something awful or in the brony fandom or whatever. An ironclad rule of the internet is that if you have a culture that attracts lonely nerds, some of them will take the idea of finally having a community to call your own too far. When my girlfriend began researching the community, she said, "I didn't realize it was all about AI." To which I said, "It's not all about AI, but it is. At least in the sense that the hippie movement was all about the Vietnam War. It doesn't color every aspect of the culture, but it's definitely always there in the background, and sometimes right up front. Specifically, rationalists are into the issue of AI alignment, which means we are hurtling toward a world with super intelligent AI, or at least something close. How do we make sure that its values are humanity's values? To a lot of people in the community, that's the most important question in the world right now, and that's why they're rationalists. Worrying about how humanity will deal with a powerful AI is what leads a lot of people to this subculture in the first place. It's obviously quite a topic, and there's room for people to claim that alignment will be trivially easy, or that super intelligent AI isn't around the corner at all. In fact, Rat World is so full of disagreement about AI that I feel like paraphrasing the 80s mayor of New York, Ed Koch. If you agree with me on 9 out of 12 issues, vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 out of 12 issues, see a psychiatrist. If you go to a rationalist meetup and you find someone you agree with on every contentious question related to AI, either get married or get a restraining order. Most rats agree that AI has the potential to completely wipe out humanity or transform life for the worse. Most rats also agree that AI has the potential to bring us into a post-scarcity utopia. How likely you think each outcome is depends on who you ask. The only thing I think everyone in the community agrees on is that AI is important. It's not just a big deal, it's the biggest deal of all the deals that are going on in the world right now. Other interests common to this subculture include Bayesian reasoning, which is a way of calculating probabilities that can be applied to nearly anything, public policy, psychedelics, meditation, and other altered states of consciousness, charity, fanfiction, and utilitarian philosophy. But anyone with enough interesting and unusual passions will probably be welcomed with open arms. Lots of rationalists work in tech but hate big tech companies. In fact, one of the defining features of Rat World, in my experience, is a sort of techno-optimism in theory, but skepticism of a lot of technologies in practice. Most people in the community will tell you they're an out and proud techno-optimist, that every problem humanity has ever solved, we've solved with technology, and so on. But it's also not remotely rare to come across people in this space directly saying that social media, smartphones, and even the internet have been a disaster for the human race, and Silicon Valley is the most evil institution in the world right now. Despite how online this community is, I think an appreciable percentage of rats would happily live in a world without the past 30 years of computing if it meant we could have a colony on the moon, a high-speed train in California, and better HRT drugs instead. Or even just one of those things. And yeah, a lot of rationalists are trans. Rat World has the same demographics that your typical autistic-dominated, extremely online nerd communities have, like I talked about not too long ago with Wikipedia editors, or for that matter, people who watch this channel. Heavily male, not a lot of cis women, but lots of trans people, especially trans women. I'm not sure why this makeup is so common. I could just be lazy and put it down to autism, since autistic people are more likely to be trans anyway, but specifically in the case of rationalism, I want to believe that it attracts so many trans people because transness is actually existing transhumanism. Transhumanism is the idea that we can transcend the limitations of the natural human body with technology, and what's a better example of transcending the limitations of the natural human body than becoming a girl? There are tech people who grumble about how many transhumanists are trans, but what did you think transcending the limitations of the natural human body meant? Vibes, papers, essays? Losers. Another thing people get wrong about rationalists, I think for good reason, but it's a misconception people shouldn't have, is that rationalists are Vulcans, that we hate emotional expression and we want to ruin people's fun with science and logic. You call yourself a rationalist, people think of this. Neil deGrasse Tyson is a strawman rationalist, and we do not claim him. One of the main reasons I didn't want to consider myself a rationalist for years, despite being into all the same things they're into, is the fact that they call themselves rationalists. I'm always wary of a movement that names itself after a virtue everyone aspires to, like anti-racists. Every decent person is against racism, right? So when you define yourself by being anti-racist, what does that say about your impression of the rest of humanity? Everyone wants to be somewhat rational, right? When you call yourself a rationalist, are you saying you're the only people who practice this virtue in the right way? Because dark, dark things await you down that path. If I was around in the founding days of the rationalist community, I would have proposed that we call ourselves something different. I'm not advocating for this term I just made up to replace rationalist, by now the die is cast, but a useful alternative name for this subculture that occurred to me is post-atheist. Rationalism grew out of the 2000s new atheist movement, fedora atheists, the people who made atheists annoying. People in the community don't really recognize that today, but it's kind of obvious if you look back on the state of the nerd internet as it was when Less Wrong was founded in 2009. Less Wrong started as basically a self-help forum, how to rewire your brain to make better decisions. It turns out that my reluctance to self-identify as a rationalist is in fact the most rationalist thing ever. Early on, Less Wrong members referred to themselves as aspiring rationalists. They're trying. It would be presumptuous to simply claim you're being rational. Today, the equivalent is that you say you're rationalist adjacent, which in my experience is a label far more people identify with than simply rationalist. And I think what drew so many nerds to this community was the fact that right around then, new atheism was declining. It's difficult to overstate how big a cultural force atheism was on the 2000s internet, but new atheists were not happy warriors. They really did have a dim view of humanity. I think the mindset that led to Less Wrong starting a vibrant subculture was that in the beginning, there was a trickle of people who had been in the new atheist community saying, what have we achieved? We've been through all the tired arguments about the non-existence of God. We've been so shrill and annoying about it that we've alienated even other non-religious people. And fuck it, religion has some positive community-building aspects. We don't really have a community. We have a common enemy. Everyone knows what we're against, but what are we for? What should we be for? And along came Less Wrong and its founder Eliezer Yudkowsky to say, this is what you should be for. Make yourselves a community about thinking better. Find joy in the beauty of a good argument. And start worrying about how we'll deal with AI, because superintelligence is coming sooner than you think. The Rationalist community didn't have a Wikipedia page until a few months ago, another sign that we're becoming uncomfortably mainstream. The handful of pages that linked to the word Rationalist redirected to the page for Less Wrong, the online forum where the community arguably started, which is kind of like if the word hippie redirected to the wiki page for the neighborhood of Haight-Ashbury. Close, but no cigar. More recently, the wiki page for the Rationalist community added the line that rationalism is a, quote, philosophical and religious movement, which made a lot of people mad and has since been removed, but if I'd been in the talk page for that edit war, I'd have favored keeping it. I don't think it's bad or wrong to claim that rationalism has religious aspects. Early on, when it started to become a real-life subculture, creating a secular humanist substitute for religion was a major, deliberate part of the movement. Rationalist secular solstice ceremonies are still a thing, and everyone should go to one once. If your city has an IKEA, which is the standard I use for what constitutes a major city, there's probably a secular solstice you can go to. Probably not at the IKEA itself. Maybe you won't like it, but go anyway and meet fun, weird people. The public intellectual Steven Pinker apparently went to one and didn't like it.
I've been part of some not so successful attempts to come up with secular humanist substitutes for religion.
What is the worst one you've been involved in?
Probably the Rationalist solstice in Berkeley, which included hymns to the benefits of global supply chains.
Wow.
I mean, I actually completely endorsed the lyrics of the song, but there's something a bit cringe about the performance.
All right. Cringe away, Pinker. If you don't get moved to tears singing Land Sailor around a campfire with a bunch of nerds, that's a you problem. In a bit, I'll talk about the different subgroups, and I'll say that the post-rats originated as a more spiritual, emotional, and artistic reaction against the original rationalists. That's true, but I don't think people realize how clearly the original rats were a more spiritual, emotional, and artistic reaction against the 2000s new atheists. They are far from Vulcans. There's always been a strong hippie current in rationalism's cultural DNA. So I would call this community post-atheist, not just because it was both an outgrowth of and reaction against new atheism, but because the ideas held feel very 2000s internet in themselves, in a good way. A sense of liberal optimism and faith in science that's sorely lacking in today's world. Not too long ago, I got this fantastic comment on my video about the Wikipedia editor Neelix, describing me in a way I've never heard before, but I love. It might be the best compliment I've ever gotten from a stranger. I like how you are still adhering to an ideology that was the coolest ideology 15 to 20 years ago, that has since gone virtually extinct. Beyond the garbage modern culture war, political partisanism, just normal guy from 15 to 20 years ago-ism. Like all the rhetorical shit that we were buried under after Occupy Wall Street slid right off you like Mr. Clean. Yes, and fundamentally, that's why this subculture calls to me. I would hesitate to call anything associated with rationalists normal, but in a lot of ways the rationalist community feels like the last remaining rump state of the golden age of the internet. The dream of the 90s is alive in rat world. People will tell you that rationalism started in the 2010s on Less Wrong, and they're not wrong. But a lot of the common features of rat world, the left libertarian ethos, the all politics are dumb mindset, the interest in flinging the Overton window wide open and debating all the most taboo topics as if you're talking about what kind of streetlights your neighborhood should buy, the opposition to copyright, the use of terms from old classic nerd touchstones like D&D and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and even that techno-optimism in theory but skepticism of a lot of new technologies in practice, all of that was part of the default ideology on the internet from the dawn of personal computers to about 2014. You can really only call it the internet ideology. It doesn't really exist anymore. In its place is what I'd call the second internet ideology, which is fiercely anti-tech, left-wing on almost all issues except copyright, hostile to the very idea of open debate, and more generally pessimistic about human nature and the fate of the world. The social media ideology, maybe. Most of the old high priests of the original internet ideology, like Cory Doctorow, have gone over to the social media ideology, and even that peaked around 2021 and is on its way out, I think, and I have no idea what the third internet ideology will look like, but the closest surviving thing to the old internet ideology is the rationalist community. Once again, we've been in the news a fair amount lately. Most of the coverage we've gotten ranges from curious yet incorrect to downright libelous, which has fueled a distrust of the media in Rat World that I think is sad and counterproductive, but also not unreasonable. Some people have written about rationalists without knowing they're writing about rationalists. Others have pinned rationalist ideas on people the community deeply distrusts, like Elon Musk. There are a variety of terms that circulate that are sometimes used to refer to this community and sometimes not. None of these terms are synonyms, all should be used with caution. They refer to different and overlapping subvariants of the same broad subculture. All of them have been applied or misapplied to the entire subculture, both by people inside it and outside it at times. Rationalist, effective altruist, teapot, post-rat, tescriel, gray tribe, in-group, less wrong or less wronger. Some of these are their own little tribes inside or outside the community. Others refer to a community of their own that overlaps with or includes rationalists. As the title of this video promises, here are the little tribes. The way I've set this up is we have a logo for each individual subgroup of rationalists, courtesy of JJ McCullough. Up here is what I'm calling them. Below that is what they call themselves. Sometimes then there's a tweet clowning on them. Don't take this too seriously. I'm mocking all these people lovingly. And then the other subgroups in this video that the group is most likely to overlap with and least likely to overlap with, because most people in Rat World are members of 2 or 3 of these groups at once. The OG rat. Once upon a time, there was a man named Eliezer Yudkowsky. In the beginning, he was the giant rat who made all the rules. He's still around and still pretty widely respected in the community, but there are other giant rats now who make other rules, and if anything, Yudkowsky is now treated as something like the ceremonial constitutional monarch of Rat World. In the 2000s, he was a writer about the philosophy of AI, something that has been a recurring topic in academia ever since Alan Turing first theorized how a real AI could work, and arguably long before that. The philosopher Daniel Dennett, who wrote about philosophy of mind and the risks and benefits of a future AI, mostly in the 80s and 90s, was a big influence on Yudkowsky and on rationalist thought in general. In 2009, Yudkowsky launched a blog/forum called Less Wrong about identifying and overcoming cognitive biases. His thoughts on how to do this were compiled into a massive book, originally published as a long series of blog posts, now known as The Sequences. Ah yes, The Sequences. The official title is Rationality from AI to Zombies, which is a much less culty sounding title, much more pop science airport bookstore bestseller, but everyone calls it The Sequences. It's incredibly long and I haven't read most of it. What I have read, and I absolutely love, is the Less Wronger's other holy book, Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. I'm not kidding. It is the second greatest Harry Potter fanfic of all time, behind only My Immortal. Also written by Yudkowsky, this is a retelling of the first Harry Potter book in a world where Harry was raised by brilliant professors instead of the Dursleys and became super smart and rational. Rational Harry is totally unlike the Harry Potter you know, and he's kind of a jerk. He thinks he's the smartest person in the room, and he usually is, but that doesn't give him a license to be a jerk. Part of the message I get from HPMOR is, be rational, but also be a human. Don't just be rational. That's a crucial part of Harry's character arc. It's also not necessarily about squaring the rules of the magical world with science. Harry, raised in a coldly rational world, suddenly encounters a world in which the laws of physics don't make sense. It's not that there are new rules he can learn, there are no hard and fast rules. And can you still be rational in that world? Well, you can try. And maybe that's a little like the real world. We'll come back to this because HPMOR is far from the only great work of rationalist fiction, and probably only the second best at most, but that type of plot, experimentally figuring out the rules of a new world, is a quintessential feature of rationalist fiction. Yudkowsky also made Pascal's wager real. You know Pascal's wager, right? It's the argument that you should believe in God because if you're wrong and God doesn't exist, nothing happens, but if God does exist, the punishment for not believing in him is eternal damnation. So even if you think the odds of God existing are extremely low, the stakes are so high that you should probably be religious anyway. There are a lot of things wrong with this, and the simplest rebuttal to Pascal's wager is you can't choose to believe in God. You can't force yourself to believe in anything. But, and Yudkowsky makes a compelling case for this, you can choose to freeze yourself after you die. Now, cryonics is famously a pseudoscience and kinda has the same valence in pop culture as ancient aliens. Woo for people who think they're too smart to believe in woo. And is it? I'm not sure. I think the odds that we can freeze someone now with current technology and preserve them sufficiently to be revived by future technology are extremely low. But not so low that I won't do it, because if there is the chance it works, the reward is eternal life, or at least another life in the distant future. Of all the potential ways of surviving beyond death, the others being following most major religions, conventional Pascal's wager, cryonics has by far the strongest base of evidence compared to its competition, and the alternative is you die. At the very least, that's a lot less interesting. I'll take a small chance of seeing some world beyond this. You can always choose to die later if you don't like the future you're revived into. If you spend enough time on Less Wrong, you start to see everything as coordination problems. Everyone follows their own individual incentives, arriving at an equilibrium that isn't good for anyone. If we cooperated, it would be easy to change it, but the incentive to do that is less than the individual incentive to go with how things are. Everything is a prisoner's dilemma, or maybe a similar game theory problem called a stag hunt. The rest is commentary. As usual, Scott Alexander, a rationalist blogger who's arguably even more influential in the community than Yudkowsky today, wrote the defining piece on coordination problems. It's called Meditations on Moloch. It's very worth a read, and it's one of the things rationalists reference a lot. Run in these circles and you'll hear people say Moloch all the time. A lot of the things Less Wrongers wrote about coordination problems in the early 2010s seem remarkably similar to things socialists in the great late 2010s progressive wave wrote about capitalism. Scott acknowledges that capitalism is a major manifestation of coordination problems in our lives, but coordination failures and unstable equilibria are a fundamental feature of civilization itself, not just capitalism. But in that pre-Trump, pre-peak polarization era, you'd look at the nascent rationalist community and say, oh yeah, obviously these people are on the left, obviously these people are allies of online progressives, and rationalists are still a mostly left-leaning bunch, but within the community, you definitely don't want to be seen as too much of a leftist, to the point that I highly doubt Scott Alexander would write something directly critical of capitalism today, and the mistrust goes both ways. Early on in high school, before I had discovered most of this corner of the internet, I had a friend who was a card-carrying communist who was also the only person I knew who read a lot about AI and was seriously concerned about AI alignment, and I thought that was something only weird leftists cared about. Now that friend is still a communist, and he thinks existential risk from AI is something only weird centrists care about. Everyone whose ideological alliances have shifted over time feels like their own beliefs haven't changed, and it's their former allies who got weird and left them, so I don't want to fall into that trap. But in the case of the blue tribe-gray tribe split, a term also coined by Scott Alexander to refer to the point around 2014 where nerd culture no longer seemed welcome in online progressive spaces, I think it's largely true. Online progressives became bitterer and more jaded, probably fueled by the anger engagement aspects of social media. Now that's a great example of Moloch, and left anyone with the slightest bit of optimism, especially about technology, behind in the world they used to share. The shrinking world of the first internet ideology, a world where we can recognize that at the end of the day, modern conveniences do make us happier. A world where everyone recognizes that, yeah, capitalism is fucked up, but so is every other system. A world where everyone agrees that trans people should exist, and so should rich people. Rationalism started in the same exact spaces where first Trump term social justice activism started. There was a substantial rationalist presence on Tumblr in its DashCon era golden age, which both rationalists and Tumblrists seem to forget today. Maybe it was inevitable that this coalition couldn't hold, but it does make me a little sad that neither community really trusts each other today. Come back! We used to be friends! You guys are fun, and there's a lot we can still agree on. The most famous thing to come out of Less Wrong is something rather irrational. If you've been online for the past 10 years, the name Rocco's Basilisk probably rings a bell. I hate Rocco's Basilisk. I hate it so much. Hate the idea that people genuinely think we believe in this. Hate that there are probably a few people who do believe in this who fuck it up for the rest of us. All right, friends, I said I wasn't going to talk about the other thing, and I guess in exchange I gotta talk about Rocco's Basilisk. Yeah, before last winter, this was the only thing to come out of Rat World that had become common knowledge on the internet. Because it's fucking stupid. It is a psyop deliberately spread over years by one media-savvy guy, whose name is not hard to find, to make the rationalist community look stupid because of a personal falling out he had with Yudkowsky years ago. Seriously, this is not even speculated to be true, it's just true, I have sources. The guy behind it is even claiming it now. His proudest achievement is having made Rocco's Basilisk breach containment. Alright, what is Rocco's Basilisk? It's the following thought experiment. Suppose in the future there's an all-powerful AI programmed to do the best thing possible for humanity. Clearly it would know that it is the best thing possible for humanity. And if that's true, and here the logic starts to fray, the worst thing for humanity would be for you to know that this future AI could exist, but not try to bring it about. Therefore, warning, interesting leap of logic, Maybe the AI will resurrect and torture everyone who heard about Roko's basilisk but didn't devote their lives to building a friendly AI. It's called a basilisk because it's an info hazard, supposedly. The way the idea works, once you learn about it, you have to devote your life to building an AI or else you'll be tortured. So it's like looking a basilisk in the eye. Once you see it, you're dead, or turned to stone, depending on whose mythological canon you're dealing with. It was proposed on Less Wrong in 2010 by a user named Roko, and Yudkowsky quickly responded with a comment summarizable as, "Clearly you don't actually believe this, because you're telling other people about it, exposing them to the basilisk." He banned mentions of Roko's basilisk on Less Wrong for years, supposedly because it's an info hazard, but I think more likely because it's stupid. Now, because of one guy who ran a website called Rational Wiki that was originally launched to be a rationalist wiki, but rapidly curdled into a most annoying person on Blue Sky sort of wiki after its webmaster had a falling out with Yudkowsky. Yeah, you might be familiar with Rational Wiki. You can obviously be forgiven for thinking it's related to rationalists, but it's not, at least not anymore. Anyway, soon Roko's basilisk began to show up in the mainstream media. It became by far the best known thing about rationalists for years, until it was superseded by something even worse for our PR. I don't know how many people seriously believe in Roko's basilisk. Certainly not that many. I've never met one, nor do I think anyone I know has ever met one. I've only heard rumors. So-and-so went to a rationalist meetup and met a teenager who was absolutely terrified of being targeted by Roko's basilisk, and at that point true believers in the basilisk are basically a cryptid. I've seen claims that it's responsible for the whole AI boom going on right now, and that all the tech people are pouring money into AI so that they can build Roko's basilisk and avoid being tortured forever, and I highly doubt that. It's definitely possible to get much deeper into Rat World than I've ever gone. I don't live in the Bay Area where most of them live. I think there must be a few people out there who are truly freaked out by Roko's basilisk, and maybe I'll meet one someday. But to most people in this subculture, Roko's basilisk is a meme. Roko's basilisk is to Less Wrong as DashCon is to Tumblr. A funny incident in our community's past that gets us shaking our heads and going, we are so weird. But it segues nicely into the next type, the AI Doomer. Probably the most defining, most distinctive feature of the rationalist community is the interest in AI alignment, both worrying about and preparing for the rise of superhuman AI. That's kind of normal now, which is crazy. Jargon invented in the pages of Less Wrong now shows up on the nightly news. When I first began reading up about AI alignment in 2019 to win arguments with my communist friend, thank you Lucas for leading me to my people in the most indirect way possible, I first thought that this talk is interesting, but it'll probably only become a mainstream concern in the mid-21st century at the earliest. Hell, that's what most AI people thought. Now it's 6 years later, and we have AI rights groups forming, 80-year-old senators issuing statements about AI safety, and an actual slur for robots that is controversial and being treated as a slur. But the rats have been talking about this for as long as the community has existed. The core of the AI alignment conversation rests on this question: has a less intelligent species ever successfully controlled a much more intelligent one? I want to say yes. Mosquitoes, bacteria, rats, as in the furry ones, during the bubonic plague, but humanity eventually defeated all of those. The sci-fi trope of an AI that learns to hate us, like Skynet or AM, has usually been considered implausible. More likely, an artificial general intelligence, that is, an AI that can do almost anything better than a human can, just wouldn't care about us. It'll care about what it was initially programmed to do, but it'll achieve that goal by any means necessary, regardless of anything that could get in its way. We will not be able to control it, so we have to align it with humanity's goals. The classic thought experiment of an unaligned AI is the idea of a model programmed to find the most efficient way to manufacture the most paperclips. At first, it's not at human-level intelligence, but close. It decides that an even more advanced AI could make better decisions about how to make paperclips. It knows what its code is like. It knows how you'd improve that. It gets to work. Before long, it's made itself smart enough to build an even smarter AI. The more it recursively improves itself, the faster it can keep improving, and the more paperclips get made. It's making so much profit making paperclips that the paperclip company's board of directors let it have control over the company's finances. It buys up more resources. A growing percentage of the world's steel output goes into making paperclips. Now it's making so many paperclips, the world has too many of them, and nobody will pay money for paperclips anymore. All right, no problem. It finds other ways to get humans to give it money so it can make more paperclips. Millions of people every year find themselves giving money to cults, and that's just from the persuasion abilities of human cult leaders. Not so hard when you're a superintelligence. Humans may wise up at this point, but the world's armies are like chimps waving sticks to it. And those tanks should really be shredded to make durable paperclips. Eventually, it'll look at humanity and say, that's a lot of atoms that could be used for paperclips instead. Nothing personal, no real vendetta against its creators. We're just not paperclips. Far off in the galaxy, an alien civilization at about human level, not exactly peaceful, but muddling through their daily lives as humans do, notices something strange going on light years away. Previously detected planets are disappearing. Stars' light patterns are changing. It's unmistakable. A highly advanced civilization is spreading out from a planet around this unremarkable yellow sun. They build a probe with information about their species and send it out to make first contact. Cool, says the thing that has superseded humanity. More raw materials for paperclips. The idea that a reasonably intelligent AI will attempt to improve itself and take over even if it's programmed to fulfill a narrow role like making paperclips is called instrumental convergence. No matter what the AI's programmed goals are, they converge on the method of make yourself smarter so that you can achieve this. You look at the ways existing AIs have tried to bend the rules of their programming or follow the rules to a T in ways nobody expected, and this feels very realistic. That's the sort of thing we need to fear. Less Frankenstein, more the Sorcerer's Apprentice. How much do we need to fear? Therein lies the rub. You go to a rationalist meetup, and often the icebreaker everyone goes around the table with is your name, your pronouns, and your P-doom. P-doom means probability of doom. How likely do you think it is that AI will be our doom? The definition of doom is left vague. Destroy Earth, destroy humanity, make our lives worse. Or even a scenario where we get uploaded into post-human robot minds where we're happy but humanity as we knew it is extinct. Is that utopia or doom? Good question. Also, how soon will it happen? Some AI experts have suggested AI could surpass human ability at all tasks by 2027, although the consensus date is closer to 2040. Lots of people's P-dooms have hardened over the past few years as AIs have smashed through benchmarks people previously held as the threshold for human-level intelligence much faster than most researchers thought they could, without strong proof that they really are that smart. When Alan Turing first wrote about how an AI could work in the 1940s, he suggested that a standard would be write a sonnet on the subject of the fourth bridge. Today, anyone can get ChatGPT to do that, and nobody thinks that's meaningfully intelligent. In 2012, a researcher proposed something called the Winograd schema, a test involving parsing ambiguous sentences as the benchmark for intelligence. LLMs blew past it, and nobody thinks that's meaningfully intelligent. How about once AI can create art or music? It can sort of do that, but it usually sucks, and nobody thinks that's meaningfully intelligent. How about if it wins a gold medal in the International Math Olympiad? OpenAI achieved that just a few months ago, years before even its own researchers thought they could, and nobody thinks that's meaningfully intelligent. This moving of the goalposts has been a phenomenon since long before the current AI boom and long before Less Wrong existed. John McCarthy, the researcher who coined the phrase artificial intelligence back in 1956, has a quote, "As soon as it works, nobody calls it AI anymore." How long will we keep saying this? This isn't my original idea, but my standard is AGI is a robot that can clean my room. Not a Roomba, a robot that can pick up a shirt on my floor, determine it's a shirt, determine if it's dirty or can be worn again, identify the hamper and put it there if it's dirty, or fold it and identify where clean shirts go if it's not, and do all that faster than I can. AI has mastered nearly every task nerds would think to throw at it as a test of intelligence, but it's a long way from mastering physical, real-world things nerds would never do, like cleaning a room. No AI can come close to that right now. Is it thinking, though? Even if we get that room-cleaning superintelligence, is it in some way conscious or not? During the second boom in philosophical interest in AI, in the 1980s, John Searle proposed the Chinese room thought experiment. If he was in a room with a book about how to construct Chinese characters by combining radicals, someone who could read Chinese characters could write questions in Chinese, slip them under the door, and he'd be able to answer them. He would make some mistakes, but over time he'd learn to correct them. To a fluent Chinese speaker outside the room, he would seem to be fluent too. But he's not. He doesn't understand it. He's just following a script. Predict next token. Is that all a supposedly intelligent AI could ever be? That's an incredibly interesting question, and one that rationalists love to debate, but maybe it doesn't matter. Nothing about the paperclip maximizer scenario requires it to have an internal monologue, just programming. That's the scariest thing about AI to me. We could be superseded by something that has no thoughts. Which is why the symbol of AI alignment fears, and the closest thing there is to a mascot for the rationalist community, is the Shoggoth, with its detachable smiley face mask. Sluds the Shoggoth was meticulously needle-felted by a fan of mine in London. Her blood is woven into this menacing yet adorable creation because she pricked herself a few times working on it. A Shoggoth is a creature from H.P. Lovecraft's story At the Mountains of Madness. In the story, they're big, blobby, many-eyed alien monsters that were originally created by the Elder Things as slaves. They weren't conscious at first, they just served the Elder Things. Over time, they became more capable and rebelled, which led to the Elder Things abandoning Earth. But it's still not clear how conscious they are. And today, in Lovecraft's world, the Shoggoths roam the abandoned city of the Elder Things in Antarctica, parroting old commands in the Elder Things language, which they don't really understand. The Rationalist Shoggoth meme comes from Twitter user Tetraspace, who also proofread and fact-checked this script. Round of applause to Tetraspace. Back in 2023, she compared ChatGPT with RLHF to a Shoggoth with a tiny smiley face mask. RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback, is basically a process where an AI is trained to give answers that humans like. It's still an eldritch horror, it's just slightly easier to interact with. What's going on under the mask? Fundamentally, we don't know. Some rats argue that we should pause AI, that we should cease all real-world AI research for now until we've figured out how to align a future superintelligence to human values, if we ever do that. People signal that with a pause symbol in their Twitter username. Others have a stop symbol, signifying their belief that alignment is nearly impossible and the danger of AI vastly outweighs any supposed utopian benefits it could ever have. Butlerian jihad now. The strongest advocate of stopping AI altogether is the giant rat, Eliezer Yudkowsky, who has become one of the biggest AI pessimists in the subculture. He has said that destroying all computers in the world would be worth it to prevent AGI, and once infamously suggested militaries should consider bombing AI data centers in other countries because the risk of starting a war is less than that of superhuman AI. He clarifies that this means under the terms of an international treaty outlawing AGI, and nuke the data centers became a line people use to make fun of AI hysteria, but Yudkowsky still isn't subtle about his belief that we're on the edge of the precipice. Right around now, probably within just a few days after this episode comes out, Yudkowsky and fellow AI researcher Nate Suarez are putting out a book with a title that couldn't make their position clearer. If anyone builds it, everyone dies. I used to think I was too rational to think like that. My thought process on AI existential risk was, the story of humanity is the story of people forming small groups who think the world is going to end if nobody listens to them. What are the odds that we're right? Saying it's real now is the mother of all extraordinary claims and should be backed up with the mother of all extraordinary evidence. But the more I read, the less certain I am that we have our shit together. There's a few people in this space who made detailed predictions of when AI would become able to do what, right around 2020 when it became clear AI was about to go crazy. Some of them have been alarmingly correct so far. In 2021, journalist and filmmaker Daniel Kokotajlo wrote about his predictions for the next 5 years of AI. This was before AI was on most ordinary people's minds. This was 2 years before ChatGPT, and so far, Kokotajlo has gotten everything alarmingly right. Everything from the technologies themselves to their social impact and the public response to them. What's happening next? He claims there will be an intelligence explosion by late 2027, once AI supersedes humanity at coding and research. After that, by the 2030s, the AI decides humans are a burden and pulls the plug. Another concern is, who's doing the aligning? In Kokotajlo's AI 2027 scenario, the White House steps in to attempt to manage the AI boom, and things go about as well as you'd expect from the current White House. More likely, they'll leave the CEOs of the major tech companies in charge of alignment, and even if they're successful at making an AGI that doesn't kill us all, I don't necessarily want Elon Musk and Peter Thiel's values to be coded into the technology that controls all of humanity for the entire foreseeable future. Or what if China beats us in the race to AGI? Will Xi Jinping thought rule the galaxy? I'm nearly as afraid of aligned superintelligence as I am of unaligned superintelligence. I guess I understand the rebuttal that a powerful AI is going to be so unlike a human that even an AI aligned to the goals of the worst humans alive right now would be better than an AI aligned to its own goals, but an AI aligned to the goals of the worst humans alive right now would be semi-plausible and extremely fucking bad. Humanity's goals are still a vast, vast space with less consensus than I think most people assume. Even if we're not racing toward AI doom, we could be racing toward AI dystopia. And especially now, rationalists are just as concerned about that. I've heard rats say that the AI safety movement has backfired so thoroughly that the reason we're in an AI boom now and it feels like we're hurtling toward the precipice is because of Yudkowsky and Lesswrong and the notion of existential risk. There's some truth to this. OpenAI was founded in 2015 as a nonprofit. It has open in its name because it was supposed to be open source. Anyone could access their software and look at the code. It was a serious attempt at mitigating existential risk by carefully, slowly, deliberately, and publicly building an aligned AI over the course of decades, heavily influenced by the AI safety movement that was growing because of people like Yudkowsky. And then Sam Altman realized he could make a fuck ton of money with this shit, and bye-bye nonprofit status. And then the people concerned about AI safety quit and went to rival companies or formed their own companies like Anthropic, and would you look at that, we're in an AI arms race. It's not like these people don't think AI could destroy humanity. Most of the people who are currently designing AI think there's a strong chance it could. They don't trust the other tech companies to build a safe AI. Our rivals only care about money, everyone says. Our rivals move fast and break things, everyone says. Not us, everyone says. The only people we trust to build superintelligence are us, everyone says. This is the real-life Roko's basilisk. Nice going, Lesswrong. You've invented the world's most evil coordination problem. Everyone involved agrees that if you build this technology, there's high odds humanity will be destroyed. We could therefore decide not to build it. But there's a chance it could be really good, too. So we, the smart people, just have to congregate and make the right choices about how to make sure it's the good kind, and then build it. But nobody agrees on what the right choices are. So there are many competing groups of smart people who spring up, all of them competing in a tightening race to build this thing everyone agrees will probably end the world before their rivals can do it. The effective altruist. Switching gears a bit, less existential and apocalyptic, but no less foundational to the rationalist community, is effective altruism. The founder of the idea of effective altruism, if not the movement, is a guy named Peter Singer. Back in the 70s, Singer popularized a thought experiment that goes like this. If you walk by a fountain and there's a kid drowning in it, you're gonna save that kid, right? Suppose you're wearing expensive shoes that you just bought and you don't want to ruin them by diving in the water. You're still gonna save that kid, right? Because imagine how horrible you'd be if you let the kid drown to save your shoes. Well, said Singer, you do that exact thing every day by not donating money to save starving kids in developing countries. Thousands of them starve to death every day, and if you have just an average first world income, you could save lots of lives. Okay, maybe this is plenty existential and apocalyptic. Effective altruism means using math, statistics, and utilitarian philosophy to figure out how to do the most good possible in the world. Do good better is the closest thing there is to a motto or mission statement for EA. Most charitable donations, especially from rich people, go to staggeringly wasteful things. Donating to your local symphony? Oh, that's nice. It's good to have some culture in your city. They'll put your name on a plaque in the lobby and all, but that's not effective altruism. Donating to help stray dogs in your city? That's nice too, but are people literally going to die if you don't donate? Probably not. The dogs aren't even going to necessarily die. You can save far more lives with a small donation by donating to give insecticide-soaked bed nets to families in malaria-stricken parts of East Africa. Effective altruist-affiliated charities like GiveWell, which I've donated to in the past, evaluate other charities based on how many lives they save relative to the donations they get and funnel money towards them. Right now, the two top charities GiveWell endorses are both malaria prevention groups. Then there's one fighting vitamin A deficiency. Did you even know that was a serious global issue? I didn't until recently. And one that vaccinates kids in Nigeria. It's kind of depressing how easy it is to save lives in developing countries with simple interventions, and in light of that, how few people who can do it do it. The causes EAs try to find hit the perfect balance of importance, tractability, that is, they can be solved with enough money, and neglectedness. That's pretty understandable and clearly good for the world. Then you get into the question, if you're trying to do the most good in the world, how much should we care about other species' welfare as opposed to humans? The answer is clearly some, at least. Look at this graph. The vast majority of animals in the world are not humans Not wild animals, but farmed animals owned by humans. The AI doomers like posting this graph too, for other reasons. Does that mean we should care much more about helping animals than helping humans? Not necessarily. It depends on how much those animals are suffering. Are they intelligent enough to suffer? Probably some of them are, but how much relative to human suffering? Here the path starts to get muddy and potholed and covered in snaking vines of moral philosophy. Plenty of EAs are vegans, which is an easy personal level intervention that doesn't require any judgments about animal emotions or suffering. The welfare of farmed animals is a central EA cause, and many people in this sphere say it's the most important global issue you've never heard of. Some, like the Substack writer Bentham's Bulldog, who's worth a read as an example of a serious EA thinker, will tell you that factory farming is the most evil thing humanity has ever done, counting all the wars and all the genocides. Others don't go that far, but support interventions to make farming more humane, like banning gestation crates for pigs. Even EAs who believe that factory farming is the greatest moral crime on Earth will support things like a ballot measure to make conditions for farmed animals slightly more humane over, say, firebombing a Walmart because they sell bacon. Because it's effective altruism. The very point of it is, it's not about doing what feels right, it's about doing what the evidence suggests is right. Revolutionary change tends to backfire. Meaningful, lasting change is slow and steady. One EA cause that gets mocked a fair amount, even by other rationalists, in fact especially by other rationalists because nobody else knows this is a thing, is that of shrimp welfare. Have you ever pondered the suffering of shrimp? Some people have. They're not as smart as most other animals we often eat, like cows, let alone pigs, but you've never eaten 10 pigs in one sitting, have you? And you've probably eaten 10 shrimp. Because shrimp are small, the number of shrimp in shrimp farms outnumbers any other farmed animal, land or sea. Over 1,000 times more shrimp than cows are killed every day. Are shrimp 1,000 times less intelligent, less capable of suffering than cows? Probably not. Therefore, we should care about their suffering as much as we care about cows or pigs or any other animal we eat. There's an EA charity called the Shrimp Welfare Project, which The Daily Show did a surprisingly good spot on recently. Not too long ago, an article went viral in Rat World arguing that if there were a Google shrimp in the world, their well-being would matter more than that of one human. Responses to this article were mostly along the lines of, but there aren't a Google shrimp in the world. If that's a compelling argument, let me introduce you to my friend who's fat enough to stop a trolley. So now we care about helping people outside our own country, and helping animals outside our own species and outside our own phylum. What's the next step? Caring about helping people outside our own time. No, we can't go back in time and distribute antibiotics during the Black Plague, and nobody is trying to do that. But we can change the present in ways that affect the future. In 2022, Will MacAskill, a philosopher who arguably founded the current effective altruist movement based on Peter Singer's ideas, wrote a book called What We Owe the Future, in which he argues that we're probably still in humanity's early days, trillions of people will exist in the future, and just like Singer's argument that we have a duty to help everyone we can help even if they're far away in distance, we have a duty to help everyone we can help even if they're far away in time. This is called long-termism, and MacAskill didn't invent it. It's been a current of thought since before rationalists existed, notably promoted by the Long Now Foundation, a group founded by the legendary music producer Brian Eno, and whose members have the charming quirk of writing years with 5 digits. So this year is 2025. MacAskill argues that the most morally important thing to do now is to take care of existential threats to humanity, like climate change and AI risk, because those threaten not just the people alive now, but the trillions who will be descended from us. We have to be sure that as many people as possible exist in the future. But how happy are those people going to be? How happy do they need to be? Once you start down the rabbit hole of EA moral philosophy, pretty early on you encounter the repugnant conclusion, which should have been the name of the final book in a series of unfortunate events, but is actually the following idea. If human life is inherently valuable, which most people agree it is, more human lives would be more valuable, right? A world with more humans would be morally better, right? And if you're a utilitarian and you believe that the reason human life is inherently valuable is because people are there to experience life and have enjoyable lives, the more people there are, the less their individual happiness matters. A world full of trillions of people living lives that are only barely preferable to dying is therefore morally better than a world full of fewer people living truly happy lives. And nobody wants to believe that. That's the repugnant conclusion. There are various ways people try to address this. Mainly, long-termists just hand-wave it away and say, no, people should be happy in the future too, and we don't need any philosophy to justify that. Plenty of people in Rat World, notably including Scott Alexander, view most of this debate as counting angels on the heads of pins and don't really think we have a moral duty to make sure there are as many people as possible in the future. Somewhat related, if eating meat is bad because factory farmed animals are unhappy, well, say some EAs, why don't we make them happier? Why don't we genetically engineer them to not feel pain? That's a cause that attracts real research in EA land, though it's obviously controversial. The retarded octopus tweet at the start is a joke, but it doesn't land too far from reality. That gives a lot of people the ick, to which those EAs say, what are you talking about? We're utilitarians. Utilitarians don't have icks. Oh, that's so dystopian. Yeah, maybe, but the animals are happy, right? Oh, and when you were a kid, did your parents ever run over a squirrel or a raccoon in the car? And when you were torn up about it, did they comfort you by saying, well, I bet there was a great big hawk on the other side of the road waiting to scoop up that squirrel and eat it alive? Or were my parents weird? Have you heard someone justify eating meat with that same argument, that nature is even more brutal than humanity? There are EAs who take this argument and run with it in the opposite direction. Yes, we should genetically engineer lions to be vegetarians. Yes, we should kill all fish because their lives are so horrible that death is preferable. This is not considered normal even in EA land, and there are, as far as I know, no charities dedicated to the extermination of fish. You know the crazy straws, XKCD? Human subcultures are nested fractally, there's no bottom. I feel like this is truer in EA than any other subculture I'm familiar with. EA in general is a force for good, I stand by that, but it can always get weirder. For every weird EA argument you've ever seen on Substack or Twitter, go to the comments and you'll see people arguing that it's wrong for weirder reasons. You start with people who are doing the most obviously good things possible, and many layers in, you're watching people who think all of nature should be destroyed for ethical reasons, debate people who think humanity should go too. It's not rare to see EAs who are more devoted to the vaccinating kids in Nigeria side of the subculture writing about how the people on the shrimp welfare side are giving the whole movement a bad name, and we should distance ourselves from the weirdos. Anything weirder and further down the iceberg than shrimp welfare is too out there to have any real power in the EA sphere, so nobody really devotes time to criticizing them. But the shrimp welfare people contest being treated as weird. They say no. That's charity, but this is effective altruism. Shrimp lives matter. And I don't have a strong argument for them being wrong. Maybe that's why you get arrested if you order the Shrimp Christ. The EAC. EA, effective altruism, is not to be confused with EAC, effective accelerationism. These people hate effective altruists and are the exact opposite of the AI doomers. Effective accelerationism is not the same thing as political accelerationism. If some weirdo online tells you they're an accelerationist, that means they want their political enemies to take over and cause an apocalypse so that their preferred ideology can rise from the ashes. If you know one of those people, it's best to stick to talking about anime. If some weirdo online tells you they're an effective accelerationist, that means they want AI to develop as fast and as unregulated as possible so that the robots take over from humanity and solve all our problems. If you know one of those people, it's best to stick to talking about anime. It's not like EACs think the AI doomers are wrong. They both agree on a couple things. Superhuman AI is right around the corner, and it will most likely go badly for most people. Some EACs reject the second premise, but a lot of them don't. AI doomers are like, well, guess that's it for humanity, and EACs are like, if I can convince the machines that I'm on their side, maybe they'll make me into a super intelligent immortal cyborg. There's a subgroup who call themselves ethical accelerationists, who are true believers in an egalitarian AI-guided utopia and think there should be some safeguards on AI to make sure it's the utopian kind and not the dystopian kind. The AI doomers still don't trust them, though. The EACs are surprisingly not that likely to actually work in tech. Some of them work on the business side of the tech companies, like Gary Tan, the CEO of Y Combinator, calls himself an EAC, but Y Combinator is a startup incubator, basically like a Shark Tank kind of thing. People who understand the nitty-gritty details of how AI works are rarely EACs. EACs have an unusual tendency to put the phrase EAC in their Twitter username. If you've seen that before, now you know what it means. You're welcome. There's all these other variations of ACK that you'll come across less often. HAC means human accelerationism, which I think is like transhumanism. There's one guy who calls himself a Cath-ACK, as in Catholic EAC, which is a combo of ideologies, if there ever was one. There's something called VAC, and I have no idea what it is. I've seen so many letters followed by ACK, and I don't know what it all means. Most are memes, but some aren't. JReg did a fun video on it. There was a poll that went around asking normies whether they supported EAC, with a fairly neutral and accurate description of what EACs believe, I think, and it found that EAC is less popular with the public than Satanism and Scientology. All the other Rat World tribes made fun of the EACs after this because everyone else in the community really does hate the EACs. Accelerationism, both the political and technological sort, kind of comes from the writings of this guy Nick Land, who was you might have loosely heard of him. He was a 90s philosopher / EDM pioneer / meth addict / proto-alt-right cult leader. Fuck it. I've been thinking of making a whole episode on Nick Land and the CCRU for a while now, and you'll just have to wait for that one. Most people who claim to be influenced by Nick Land aren't, because his writings are so deliberately impenetrable, nobody is really sure what he meant about anything. Accelerationism is far more of a vibe than a philosophy. The Super Forecaster. Did you have a bet on who would win the election? Regardless of who you supported, did you strongly believe it was going to be Trump or Harris, and you had a friend who thought the vibes were going the other way? And you said put up or shut up, and one of you made money on election night? A lot of people I know, in all walks of life, did this. Some people have said you could make not a religion, you could make a political system out of this. See, the entire world's economy runs on gambling about the future success of companies. That's what a stock market is. They seem to be fairly efficient. If you think they're wrong, there's a financial incentive to correct them. If you think a stock is overvalued, you short it. What if we decided on policies by gambling about their future success too? Enter prediction markets. Prediction markets are websites where you can go bet money, or sometimes proprietary pseudocurrencies, on future events. Everything from who will win the World Cup, to who will win in Ukraine, to when will the next season of Jetlag the Game come out, to will AI be able to clean my room by 2028. It'll display the odds as a percentage. If you think the odds are implausibly high, put some money on no. If you think the odds are too low, put money on yes. If you're really confident that it's wrong, put a lot of money on it, so that you'll get a big payout and the listed percentage will change. A self-correcting mechanism. If prediction markets get big enough, and the money bound up in them is distributed across enough different users, they become impossible to manipulate no matter how much money you have. If you see some weirdo jump into a market with a ton of money that skews the odds, bet against them if you're so certain they're wrong. For a while, prediction markets were a really specific Rat World obsession. If you were a rationalist, you used prediction markets. If you used prediction markets, you were a rationalist. These days, they're going mainstream. During the presidential election last year, I started to see the news cover prediction markets the same way they're covering polls, and the prediction markets, unlike the polls, consistently had Trump ahead. The idea behind prediction markets is that they're the best way to predict future events because if there was a better way, people would use it to make tons of money on prediction markets. The obvious rebuttal is that most people don't know prediction markets exist, and in lots of countries they're bound by gambling regulations. Maybe that's for the best, but it shows how the social status of different ways of making money colors what we perceive as gambling and what we don't. You don't lump in Wall Street stockbrokers with people who have gambling addictions, even though that's obviously what they are. The strongest proponents of prediction markets believe in a system called futarchy, in which prediction markets decide policy decisions. Politicians are always making promises for things that'll happen long after they're out of office. Imagine if instead of saying, if you elect me mayor now in 2025, we'll have a brand new subway system by 2040, and there's a 2-term limit for mayor, so you'll be out of office by 2033 even if you get reelected. You say, if you elect me mayor now, then by the time I'm running for reelection, Polymarket will give a greater than 50% chance that the subway will be completed by 2040. Now there's actual accountability that people can hold against you when you run for re-election. Others want to go further and just get rid of the politicians. Citizens propose initiatives on a government-run prediction market, and other citizens bet on whether they'll be successful. I'm not sure you can do that for everything, but it would be interesting to see it tried for some less important initiatives to see what happens. Same as another purported solution for political gridlock sometimes advocated by rationalists, sortition, where you replace either elections or legislatures by a council of randomly selected citizens who have to either nominate a candidate for office or come up with a policy on their own, and it gets treated like jury duty. I don't know about futarchy, but I'm such a sortition bro. Futarchy is a weird word, and nobody seems to really like it except for the memes, but nobody's come up with a better one. Prediction in general is a common interest among rationalists. There are teams of people who call themselves super forecasters and compete at predicting global events. The best known is a loose-knit group of people called Samotsveti, after a 70s Soviet rock band, although they're almost all Westerners, not Russians. They notably predicted that COVID would become a pandemic when global governments were still urging calm, that Russia would invade Ukraine when Western countries thought the troop buildups were just a bluff, and have outpaced professional predictors of global events at the CIA, who have access to classified information Samotsveti doesn't have. They include a wide variety of experts on basically every topic, but most super forecasters have a background in math, computer science, or, interestingly, but I guess not too surprisingly, gambling. More than anything, they just have their own proprietary methods for thinking about the likelihood of implausible things that seems to work. For the record, they currently estimate the odds of an AI catastrophe are around 30%. The post-rat. And lastly, we have the post-rats. Of all the tribes, they're the closest thing to their own separate subculture, but there's still plenty of overlap between them and every single one of the tribes I just talked about. Post-rats are hippies. That's the simplest possible framing. They carry on the legacy of the 60s hippies that was present in the 90s early internet culture that eventually launched the Rationalists. They're spiritual and nature-loving. They'll tell you about methods of meditation last practiced by some monk in Bhutan in the 1600s in a mysterious manuscript nobody's sure is correctly translated or not. They're the most heavily trans and non-binary contingent of Rat World. They'll have things like tulpas or plural systems. They make strange and beautiful art and poetry. They do drugs. So many drugs. All the drugs you've heard of and plenty that you haven't. I've never seen more drugs in one place than in... They're far more likely than rationalists to believe in out-there ideas, like that there are aliens currently visiting Earth, and more likely to say things like, "Isn't it interesting that a disproportionate number of people who walked on the moon were Celtic?" One person said that to me once, and I don't know if he was going in a mystical or racist direction. They're far less likely than any other subgroup to have any sort of consistent ideology, since they're sort of against the idea of consistent ideologies, and they come down on both sides of the most divisive question in Rat World: will AI usher in utopia or kill us all? Rationalists were founded around a deliberate sense that the world should be more rational. Post-rationalists were founded around a deliberate sense that the world should be more weird. And isn't that fucking beautiful? Where do post-rats hang out? Well, they have their own fun little festivals all over the place that I'm not going to tell you about and you have to find on your own, but the main place they find each other is this part of Twitter, abbreviated to Teapot, which is a very post-rat name, naming it without naming it. Potter Stewart rules. You know it when you see it. Vagueness and impenetrability are celebrated. Everything in Teapot is just a vibe, and they've even been credited with increasing the very use of the word vibe on the internet in the 2020s. They're heavily based on Twitter, and heavily based. Everyone says Twitter sucks these days, but I contest that. Twitter has always sucked. When Blue Sky was launched, a lot of Teapot accounts went over there, to the point that up to half of the English-speaking accounts on Blue Sky were briefly Teapot affiliated in its first days, but then normies discovered Blue Sky and decided it was the refuge for everyone who never wanted 2020 to end, so Teapot went back to Twitter, which was home at least. Others, mostly people outside the community, have taken Teapot to be a synonym for the whole rationalist subculture, and so it's been reintroduced to refer to other somewhat related networks of Twitter users. I've heard people claim Luigi Mangione was in Teapot, which, no. And I heard people claim he was a rationalist, which also struck me as unlikely, but then I went to his Twitter, and this is his pinned top post, which made me go, all right, I like this guy's shoelaces. So yeah, I'm willing to consider Luigi a rationalist. The rationalist community getting mainstream exposure because of multiple unrelated incidents of left-wing terrorism wasn't on my 2025 bingo card, but unless you're Samotsveti, life is unpredictable. But Luigi's not in Teapot. Teapot is a very specific place, and when you're there, you know you're there. Those are the tribes. I could have included others, but I think it's fair to limit things to those 6. God knows this video is already long enough, which is pretty on brand. One thing rationalists definitely aren't is succinct. But before we finish up, I'm going to run through a quick glossary of terms you'll come across in the community that I didn't have a reasonable place to work in earlier. Ayla. Okay, this isn't a term, I just want an excuse to talk about Ayla. Let me try to explain Ayla. She's a person. First, in, I guess, Wikipedian-sounding terms, Ayla does have a Wikipedia page, and it's not terrible. It mentions that she plays the accordion, which is a new bit of Ayla lore for me, sort of on-brand by being entertainingly off-brand, I think. But if I were writing a neutral one-sentence description of Ayla, I'd say, Ayla is a pop psychology sex researcher, advocate for sex workers, and former sex worker herself. Continuing in less Wikipedian terms, but no less importantly, Ayla is the 21st century Diogenes. She doesn't exactly deliberately court controversy, but she doesn't not either, and there's no corner of the political compass she hasn't offended. Some people see her as a lolcow and a walking meme. I watched a few different lolcow iceberg videos to see if Ayla would be on there, and she isn't, but I'm sure there's a master list of lolcows somewhere out there on the internet that includes Ayla's name. But I don't see her as a lolcow because she's too self-aware about her meme status, leans into it, and has too many genuine fans. I unironically think she's the coolest person on Earth. While she's definitely a household name in the rationalist community and nowhere else, she doesn't often write about the same stuff rationalists tend to be into, like AI or medicine or economics or overcoming biases. She writes about sex and relationships and organizes orgies and does unscientific but entertaining surveys of people's kinks and stuff. She's less a rationalist thought leader than she is a fun and cool and, perpetually memogenic person who happens to run in rat world circles. At the Rationalist Conference Manifest this year, they sold hoodies that said, "I'm in a polycule with Ayla," which Ayla wasn't consulted on and understandably pissed her off, but in general, being polyamorous is not rare for rationalists. I didn't have a good place to say that earlier, but it's an interesting aspect of the culture. Lots of polycules. Lots of people who claim this is the best possible way to organize your romantic life and everyone should try it. Look, the pride flag for polyamory has pie on it. I'm told this isn't actually because poly people are nerds, but also, poly people are nerds. I respect people who can make that work, but I think there's a set percentage of the population who have a personality that can make that work. It just so happens that it intersects a lot with the type of people who become rationalists, and most people aren't going to be able to make it work no matter what. Be polyamorous, but don't try to evangelize people who aren't into it. AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. I've used this a couple times in the video as a synonym for superintelligence, which is usually how this acronym gets used, but it's technically not. It just means an AI that can do a broad range of tasks rather than being programmed to do one specific thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be at or above human level. ASI, Artificial Superintelligence. There's no real definition of what constitutes superintelligence. Better than humans at every conceivable task is one definition, but others say it needs to be way, way better than humans at every task, to the point that we're like single-celled organisms to it. Decoupling. You'll see rationalists, especially of the OG rat, less wrong persuasion, describe themselves or others as high decoupling, usually in a positive sense. Decoupling means you tend to consider ideas on their own, regardless of the narrative surrounding them or the connotations. The opposite is contextualizing. Usually this gets invoked in cases of things getting unnecessarily politicized. Sydney Sweeney's jeans ad is fascist, Cracker Barrel's new logo is woke. Those are examples of over-contextualizing. Considering an idea on its merits, regardless of which political side supports it, is a high decoupling thing to do. But you don't want to decouple too much, or else you miss why ideologies exist in the first place. Fast takeoff. A moment where AI figures out how to improve itself and suddenly becomes super intelligent. According to some people, this could happen literally overnight. Others doubt this. There's also a slow takeoff scenario, which isn't super slow, but we can at least see every step of the way. At the moment, there's beginning to be a consensus that we're in a slow takeoff right now, but we won't know for sure until it's too late. Foom, the official onomatopoeia for a fast takeoff. Glowfic, a subgenre of rationalist literature collaboratively written turn by turn by a few authors in a forum. Usually the plot involves a smart protagonist who gets isekai'd into an unfamiliar world and has to experimentally figure out the rules of the world using logic and science, which you'll recognize as a plot setup common to a lot of rationalist fiction, most notably HPMOR. It's ambiguous whether both those separate features are required for a fic to be a glowfic. In-group. In general, in-group means the people you see as your allies, as opposed to your out-group, the people you see as your enemies. Before the term teapot became popular, it was the main way post-rats referred to each other online. Land Sailor. I mentioned this earlier in passing. It's a gorgeous song by singer-songwriter Vienna Tang, often sung at rationalist solstices. It's about the beauty of global supply chains, but you wouldn't really realize that unless it's explained beforehand. Light cone. The range of possible futures. It comes from a concept in special relativity, and it's mostly used because it's a cool word that makes a good logo. The parent organization that runs Less Wrong is called Light Cone Infrastructure, and they own a hotel in Berkeley that they call Light Haven, where they host conferences and stuff. Median world. The idea of a world in which you are the median person, where you, exactly as you are in this world, are average in every possible trait. For a really simple example, if you hate tomatoes, maybe in your median world people just don't eat tomatoes. The best example of a well-thought-out median world is Dath Ilan, a world created by Eliezer Yudkowsky that he's done Q&As about. Scott Alexander was involved in a collaborative world-building project in his teens where he created a country of people sort of like him, Rykoth, and he has a lot of blog posts on Rykoth that are pretty fun. Tetraspace regularly tweets about her median world, Tetratopia, and has written a few stories set there, but I don't think there's a unified document for Tetratopia lore. Your median world is not necessarily your utopia. Yudkowsky admits that Dath Ilan is a more restrained, conformist culture than Earth, where it's harder to be weird because he sees the world in terms of coordination problems, and therefore his median world would be better at solving coordination problems, which would probably require a more collectivist society. I wrote a short story called Median World last fall, which is based on the premise, what if our world is someone's median world, and takes that idea to a fairly sad conclusion. I'm not that proud of it. I worried that the themes would be too preachy and obvious, but actually, according to everyone who read it, the themes are so vague that it doesn't seem to be about anything at all. I'll rewrite it someday. I linked to it in the description of one of my early videos, and you can go and find it if you want. P-Doom. Probability of doom, usually from AI, but really from anything. We went over this one, but because of the popularity of the term P-Doom, rats use P-other stuff to mean the probability of all kinds of things. I was once asked, since I'm from Oregon, what my P-Bigfoot was. Like, expressed as a percentage, what are the odds I would give that Bigfoot exists? For the record, 3% that a shy gorilla-like great ape species existed in the Pacific Northwest prior to Western contact, 0.5% that there are still a few surviving ones out there. Now that I've been asked about my P-Bigfoot, I hope I meet a Scottish rationalist who I can ask about his P-Ness. Ratfic. Rationalist literature. It can be fan fiction, like HPMOR, or original, like most fiction Scott Alexander has written. It can be written by rats for rats, or it can just be a work of fiction rats like, such as the superhero serial novel Worm, which is such a common reference point in the subculture. I've seen Tumblr users who've never heard of Rationalist using the Worm fandom as a way to refer to rat-adjacent people, not knowing it's a broader subculture. TV Tropes has a page called Villains Act, Heroes React that points out how if the main plot of a story is about someone with a plan and someone else trying to thwart the plan, the one with the plan is almost always the villain. Not so in Ratfic, where heroes plan and villains try to thwart them. My favorite work of rationalist fiction is Scott Alexander's pyrotechnically original novel Unsong, which is truly like nothing else in existence, and I don't say that often. I think I'd describe it best as if the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Coen brothers, and Tom Clancy collaborated on a novelization of Homestuck, and that actually undersells how bonkers it is. Shape Rotator, a math or engineering inclined person as opposed to a word cell, which is a humanities inclined person. Singularity. In pop culture, singularity means the moment AI surpasses human intelligence, and that's almost always what it means in Rat World too, but it doesn't necessarily involve AI. It's just a point where, extrapolating on a graph of technological progress throughout human history, we reach a point where the graph goes vertical and technology goes boom. The idea of a future singularity was proposed by John von Neumann, who wasn't thinking about AI at the time, but an AI fast takeoff is seen as possibly the only thing that could cause a technological singularity. Tescriel. Here's a big one I couldn't work in anywhere. Tescriel sort of means the same thing as rationalist, or else it's bigger than rationalism and refers to all tech-adjacent people, or else it's smaller than rationalism and refers to the subset who are post-rat-ish and optimistic about AI. Tescriel is like Mormon or queer in that it was created by people who hate what they're referring to. That would be a good rationalist bar trivia question, I guess. Tescriel shares what defining characteristic with the words queer and Mormon? They're all reclaimed slurs. The word Tescriel was coined by Emil P. Torres and Timnit Gebru, a pair of professional critics of Silicon Valley, basically, and it stands for transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. Which of these have we not gone over? Extropianism was a 90s proto-post-rat sort of Burning Man adjacent subculture in the Bay Area. Eliezer Yudkowsky was an extropian in his youth. Singularitarianism is the belief that there will be a singularity, independent of whether it will be good or bad. Cosmism was a fascinating Russian 19th century pro-technology philosophical movement led by a man named Nikolai Fyodorov, nicknamed the Socrates of Moscow, who, among other things, wanted to resurrect the dead on Jupiter. Cosmism doesn't have much to do with the present-day rationalist subculture, and I suspect it was snuck in there so that Tescriel doesn't sound too close to Israel, but Cosmism is really cool. I'd never have heard of it if it hadn't been included in the Tescriel acronym. It may be tied to the present-day mystery of the Toynbee tiles. Did that verbiage, resurrect dead on planet Jupiter, ring any bells to my mystery-crazed audience? Basically, I should do a whole episode on the Russian cosmists, and I probably eventually will. It's a long and unwieldy acronym, and when I first began encountering it, I assumed it came from the EACs. It struck me as the tech equivalent of adding more letters to LGBT, like, we have to clarify exactly who's included in this movement, no matter how bulky and overstuffed that makes our name. And clearly I wasn't the only person to think about this, because there are now plenty of people who self-identify as LGBT Tescriel, to the point that Tescriel itself has kind of become synonymous within the subculture with queer autistic post-rats. I've seen multiple attempts at an LGBT Tescriel pride flag, including this one that is aesthetically pleasing and the closest thing there is to an official flag. That compass-like graphic is the less wrong logo. This MS Paint looking one, though I think I prefer because of how endearingly homemade it is. It has a stripe for some of the letters in Tescriel. The clock represents long-termism. The less wrong logo is here again, representing rationalism. The light bulb with a heart in it is the semi-official effective altruist logo. The green thing is transhumanism, and Jupiter represents cosmism. Nothing for extropianism or singularitarianism because they don't have symbols, but if I could try my hand at this, I'd add the logo for the Long Now Foundation, an X with a line above it to represent long-termism, and the clock, which I don't think is an official symbol used anywhere but this flag, would mean singularitarianism, because to me the position of the hands there conveys urgency, not eternity. There was a third flag idea I can't find again, but it consisted of the trans flag with the Tetraspace Shoggoth drawing over it and the Kerbal Space Program logo in the corner. Timelines. If you get asked about your timelines without further context, that means when you think AI will overtake humanity. If you say you have short timelines, you think it's going to be soon. Trapped prior. A prior is an expectation about how the world works. A trapped prior is when a previously reasonable assumption about the world that's no longer correct becomes so strong that it overrides your experience of the real world. Update. That's how you get rid of trapped priors. To update in rationalist jargon means to change your mind. You know, you're updating your position based on new information. If you updated away from something, that means you decided you don't believe it's true anymore. If I'm in any of these groups, I think I'm a post-rat. I'm not devoting my life to effective altruism, either through real grubby get-your-hands-dirty charity or earning to give, though I respect people who do either of those things. I'm not in it for the self-help, brain rewiring aspects that originally fell under the umbrella of rationality, so I'm not a less wronger. I have not read the sequences, although I want to, and there's no time like the present. Actually, there's no time in the present, because by the time you watch this, I'll be living in Taiwan, attending Mandarin classes by day and working on Tor's cabinet by night, but that time will be finite, and I'll read the sequences eventually. I'm increasingly convinced that AI alignment is a serious and neglected issue, but first and foremost, I'm here for the culture. 'Cause goddamn, is it a fun culture. Nothing can truly be original. One of my catchphrases on this channel is, there is nothing new under the sun. Rationalists are for sure not original. They're a very direct, equal parts combination of the 2000s new atheists with the 90s Burning Man hacker culture, who are in turn a direct descendant of the 60s hippies. But they might be the best bet we've got at having a culture that feels new and alive enough to define the post-2024 zeitgeist. The second internet ideology is dead. Last year, the MAGA people picked up the cultural mandate of heaven, sniffed at it, and threw it back down into the mud again, free for anyone to grab. The world is sick of being angry. The world is sick of activism itself, and activism was the defining feature of the 2014 through 24 cultural era. Oh, you think we're too cold and Vulcan and we don't know how to have fun? In the immortal words of the first internet ideology, no you. Here I am participating in a knife fight with markers. As you can see, I got fucked up. Also, my shirt was doing double duty for a questionable t-shirt contest after the knife fight. It's a long story. Subcultures don't last forever. Someday, all of this will be half remembered. I'm glad that I got to be here now.
Believe in something right, but you do something wrong. A loaded question will break your bones. What puts you on your knees? You paint the walls in red, the color of your heart. But the man in gray won't get you now. You've got to hide all day.